Herzlich willkommen. Schön, dass ihr alle da seid. Ich bin Rike vom Bits-und-Bäume-Bündnis. Ich bin Anja.
Ich bin Ben, auch vom Bits und Bäume und vom Forum InformatikerInnen für Frieden und gesellschaftliche Verantwortung.
Genau, wir nehmen euch heute Abend mit durch eine Reise zu demokratischeren digitalen Infrastrukturen. Und es ist total schön, dass ihr euren Weg hierher gefunden habt, ins Café Kotz, eine, ich würde sagen, wichtige zivilgesellschaftliche Institution in Frankfurt. Wurde zumindest von den Frankfurtern gesagt. Genau. Richtig schön. Genau. Und Anja, ich würde an dich übergeben.
Genau, hört ihr mich übers Mikro? Gut. Wir wollten noch fragen, ist there somebody who's not understanding German? Francesca? Yes, I know. Okay. Sonst würden wir Übersetzung machen. Habt ihr das besprochen? Okay. Genau, und es gibt gleich zwei also Teile des Programms, die auf Englisch stattfinden. Braucht dafür eine Person eine Flüsterübersetzung? Okay. Gut, genau, ich stelle mich noch mal kurz vor. Ich bin Anja Höfner, ich arbeite fürs Konzeptwerk Neue Ökonomie in Leipzig und bin schon von Anfang an Teil vom Bits-und-Bäume-Bündnis und freue mich auch sehr, dass ihr heute Abend alle hier seid. Und was Bits und Bäume eigentlich ist, das erzählt euch jetzt ganz kurz Ben.
Genau, ja, schön, dass ihr da seid. Bits und Bäume, was ist das eigentlich? Ja, 2017 haben sich einige Menschen hingesetzt und haben festgestellt, so dass so die Umweltorganisationen und Menschen, die sich mit Sozialgerechtigkeit oder mit Ökonomie beschäftigen, alle so parallel an ähnlichen Sachen arbeiten und das aber so, wie das alles miteinander zusammenhängt, gerade und so wie wir Digitalisierung gestalten, eigentlich ein Brandbeschleuniger ist für all unsere Probleme, die wir haben. Also haben sich 2017 Menschen zusammengeschlossen, haben die, salopp gesagt, die Techies und die Ökos zusammengenommen und haben die erste Bits- und Bäume-Konferenz sich ausgedacht, um dort Communities zu vernetzen. Und es war ein sehr großer Erfolg. 2018 die erste große Konferenz in Berlin. Daraufhin folgten dann, also wir haben einen Forderungskatalog uns ausgedacht, den wir rausgegeben haben. Wir haben sehr viel Menschen und sehr viel Wissen zusammen bekommen aus verschiedensten Bereichen, die sich vernetzt haben. Eben die Techies und die Ökos, Bits und Bäume. Ähm, und daraufhin folgten dann noch viele kleinere Veranstaltungen, dann auch 22 die nächste große Konferenz. Und so wächst und wächst Bits und Bäume nicht nur als Konferenz und als Vernetzung von Organisationen, sondern auch als Community, woran wir auch weiterarbeiten, dass sich also auch Menschen in verschiedenen Ortsgruppen zusammenfinden und dort auch an diesen Themen arbeiten und darüber sprechen.
Danke, Ben. Ich glaube, das geht immer wieder. Ich kann die Folie, doch, die Folie nicht. Das ist, genau, es gibt so einen offiziellen Trägerkreis noch von Organisationen, die dieses Bündnis stellen und tragen. Die seht ihr hier. Genau, es sind Organisationen aus dem digitalpolitischen Tech-Bereich, aus dem entwicklungspolitischen Bereich und aus dem Umweltbereich. Näher ran, danke. Genau, und warum machen wir heute diese Veranstaltung? Wir sind heute hier in Frankfurt. Ben, kannst du für mich klicken? Ich will zur nächsten Folie. Genau, wir sind heute Abend hier in Frankfurt, weil morgen und übermorgen hier in Frankfurt der Digitalgipfel der Bundesregierung stattfindet, unter dem Motto Deutschland digital, innovativ, souverän, international. Dieser Gipfel findet seit 2006 jährlich statt und wird vom Bundesministerium für Wirtschaft und Klima ausgerichtet, jetzt auch zusammen mit dem Ministerium für Verkehr und Digitales. Und im Fokus standen da bisher vor allem staatliche Akteure und unternehmerische. Und letztes Jahr wurde dieser Gipfel das erste Mal für die Zivilgesellschaft geöffnet und auch am Programm beteiligt. Aus unserer Erfahrung vom letzten Jahr haben wir gedacht, aber dass wir dieses Jahr im Rahmen des Digitalgipfels gerne nicht nur eine kleine Bühne oder einen kleinen Workshop auf dem Digitalgipfel bespielen wollen, sondern ein eigenes Event in dem Zusammenhang anbieten, indem wir auch über ein Thema sprechen, was dort auch diskutiert wird, nämlich über digitale Infrastrukturen. Und warum reden wir eigentlich darüber? Genau, und was ist das überhaupt und warum ist das wichtig? Ben, kannst du die nächste Folie machen? Danke, da steht jetzt nur eine Überschrift. Genau, digitale Infrastrukturen sind quasi die Produktionsmittel digitaler Ressourcen. Und diese Ressourcen braucht es, um Software bereitzustellen. Wenn unser alltägliches, berufliches, aber auch soziales Leben zunehmend mehr von digitaler Technik strukturiert wird, dann ist es halt umso wichtiger, auch aus einer kritischen zivilgesellschaftlichen Perspektive darüber zu sprechen, wer eigentlich diese Produktionsmittel besitzt, bereitstellt und kontrolliert. Nochmal klicken. Global gesehen werden 2/3, seht ihr gleich, 2/3 des weltweiten Markts für Cloud-Dienstleistungen von 3 großen Unternehmen, nämlich Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure und Google Cloud bereitgestellt. Diese Anbieter profitieren davon, wenn immer mehr Dienste oder auch immer mehr Tätigkeiten in die Cloud verlagert werden, denn sie stellen sie bereit und kontrollieren damit auch diese Infrastrukturen. Es gibt verschiedene Lock-in-Effekte, die auch diese Monopolstellung von den Unternehmen befördern. Und das ist sowas wie, dass Kundinnen Exit-Fees zahlen müssen, um auch überhaupt zu anderen Cloud-DienstleisterInnen mit ihren Daten wechseln zu können. Das kann sein, dass es technische Beschränkungen gibt, wie eine mangelnde Interoperabilität zwischen Systemen. Und es gibt häufiger so kostenlose Nutzungskontingente oder Pakete, die das halt attraktiv machen, alle Dienstleistungen bei einem Anbieter zu bündeln. Das ist ein Riesengeschäft. Allein Amazon Web Services, also Amazon macht die meisten Gewinne ja nicht über ihren Handel, sondern eben über Amazon Web Services, macht voraussichtlich in diesem Jahr 100 Milliarden Dollar Gewinn. Das ist richtig viel. Genau, und dieses große Geschäft hat natürlich auch hohe ökologische und soziale Kosten. Rechenzentren brauchen enorm viel Strom. In Irland gibt es schon sehr viele davon. Und bis 2029 wird der Bedarf an Strom, der in Rechenzentren gebraucht wird, geschätzt 27%, also ein Viertel des Landesstromverbrauchs von Irland ausmachen. In Chile, da spielt auch diese Grafik drauf an, hat Google 2019 ein Rechenzentrum gebaut, was pro Sekunde 170 Liter Wasser braucht, in einer schon also der trockensten Region der Welt mit den geringsten Niederschlägen. Und auch in den Niederlanden wird befürchtet, dass wenn riesige Rechenzentren gebaut werden, das negative Auswirkungen auf die Landwirtschaft hat, weil eben so viel Wasser für die Kühlung gebraucht wird. Angesichts dieser Probleme, die ich jetzt nur kurz angerissen habe, sind wir der Überzeugung, dass Teilhabe und Souveränität im Internet grundlegend sind, um das digitale Leben ökologisch, gerecht und demokratisch zu gestalten. Dafür veranstalten wir den heutigen Abend und haben folgendes Programm für euch. Gleich gibt es ein Fire-Chat, also eine kleine Podiumsdiskussion, Fragerunde mit Francesca Bria, die schon da ist, worüber wir uns sehr freuen. Sie wird gleich nochmal vorgestellt. Im Anschluss schalten wir online Esther zu, die uns zu kolonialen Imagination und Big Tech in Afrika berichten wird. Und im Anschluss machen wir eine Pause, da gibt es dann auch was Kleines zu essen und gehen dann in 3 parallele Workshops, die ich gleich nochmal kurz erwähne. Und ab 8:50 ungefähr kommen wir nochmal hier zusammen und dann gibt es nochmal nettes Beisammensein, Austausch, Raum für Vernetzung. Die Workshops seht ihr hier, die stellen wir gleich nochmal vor. Es geht um Vergesellschaftung, um das Fediverse und um die Forderung und die Kampagne öffentliches Geld, öffentliches Gut. Mehr dazu später nochmal. Und jetzt freue ich mich auf den Feierchat mit Francesca Bria, meiner Kollegin Friederike Hildebrand und Johanna Graf. Ich stelle noch kurz Friederike und Johanna vor und ihr stellt gleich Francesca vor. Johanna Graf arbeitet bei Germanwatch zu Digitalpolitik und Kreislaufwirtschaft und ist auch Teil von Bits-und-Bäume. Friederike Hildebrand ist die Netzwerkkoordinatorin von dem Bits-und-Bäume-Bündnis und war auch schon länger Teil in dem Trägerkreis. Ich freue mich. Bühne frei für euch.
Okay. Test? Yeah, nice. Okay. And now it's my pleasure. We're switching to English to introduce Francesca Bria. We're so delighted that you are with us tonight. I think it's safe to say that you're one of the most important critical thinkers on the democratic European internet or infrastructures. And your writing and speaking and your political work has influenced a lot of our work as civil society and also progressive politicians all over Europe. We noted some of your accolades. So you're an innovation economist and digital policy expert and currently fellow at the Mercator Foundation and an honorary professor at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at UCL in London. And you're part of the high-level roundtable for the new European Bauhaus set up to accelerate the EU Green Deal. So it's an honor to have you here. You will be at the Digital Summit tomorrow, I think. So we hope it's a good start of your weekend here in Frankfurt. Maybe some of you have read the op-ed you wrote for the German newspaper Zeit. I think a month ago, maybe. If you look up this article, you can see that there's a lot of interaction with it, many comments, very, yeah, it's a little difficult, but I think you can see how important the points are that you're making. And one of the questions you are asking is whether tech bosses like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg are above the democratic law here in Europe. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on why you think this privatization of the digital infrastructures in Europe are a problem.
So first of all, thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. Also, it's great to be in this space because I have the feeling here there is a resistance happening and lots of work from the students to keep it alive and to keep critical thinking alive, which I think is part of the problem and maybe part of the solution. So thanks for having me here. So maybe let's start from the fact that I think we became quite used in a bad way. So we became quite even a bit in an anesthetical way, anesthetized by the fact that we have such a corporate concentration of power in particular today's digital world. And I think the fact that we see such a concentration of power that's not only infrastructural power, that maybe we will talk about it later, but also financial power, political power, and social power, like really concentrated in the hands of a very few billionaires that actually are running what we used to think are digital public spaces, so public spaces for our everyday life, in the so-called digital world. So we are so, I think, used to think like that, that we don't realize anymore that we are living in a moment where these billionaires really believe they are above the law. And they continue to tell us so. And I mean, the article that you are referring to was just after, Elon Musk was attacking the European Commission because they were trying to, remind him that in Europe we have new regulation like the Digital Service Act, the Digital Market Act, and then they have to comply with the European law. And also, it was immediately after Durov, which is the CEO of Telegram, was, temporarily arrested in France. And because of like very, very dark thing that is doing, like illegal, completely illegal things that are happening on these platforms. And both of them, I think, had this attitude with our politicians and also with the juridical system to say, well, you know, you are a fascist. I think Elon Musk used the word like, you are fascist. And he also said the same to the government of Brazil, to President Lula, that was, of course, democratically elected, and to the judge of Brazil when they were, you know, when they block X in Brazil because Elon Musk was comply with the Brazilian law. So I think, you know, we have a massive problem, and the massive problem is because they believe they are above the law, but also because their infrastructural, the power they hold by, you know, owning the critical infrastructure of our modern society is becoming so big, and we have less and less tools to make sure that we can actually share this power. And I think part of the problem is also that I think during the pandemic, something has happened maybe in our society where more and more people realize that the digital world, I mean, the technological world is not a parallel world. Because I think these billionaires, that's what they want us to believe, that basically don't worry because we are running a parallel technology world. Actually, they want to run everything parallel. They don't pay taxes. They want to privatize as much as possible of the state. They are owning all our data, they're owning satellites, they're owning fiber, they're owning bits and pieces of what it used to be public infrastructure, or anyway, democratic or accountable infrastructures, and, you know, kind of running it as a totally privatized space. And I think during the pandemic, because we had to digitize a lot of our life, we realized how much education, healthcare, public spaces, and so on are becoming digital. So all of a sudden, for example, our kids had to do everything digital, and they started using, of course, private platforms to learn and to do everything, you know, via digital tools. Healthcare, we realize how much, you know, this is becoming digital, and who is owning our healthcare data and what can happen with our healthcare data is a very fundamental thing. But I think, I mean, even more in the last, let's say, 5-10 years, we realize with platforms such as Airbnb or Uber, you know, for example, Airbnb, how much this business model is affecting our rent prices, you know, how much the housing prices are affected by these rapacious capitalistic models. So I think, what I want to say is that more and more people realize this is not about technology. This is about, in fact, our political life, is about fundamental services of our life, healthcare, education, housing, public space, and so on, which is increasingly privatized and also, of course, increasingly owned by very few billionaires, which are making higher and higher profits. So we think we are facing the biggest, concentration of power in the Industrial Revolution. I don't think that there is, in the previous wave of the Industrial Revolution, I don't think we have seen such an important, concentration and dominance of market power in the hands of very, very few companies. And I also think that we have to alert these in a very kind of political way, because I think what's happening now with the cloud that you show, with the concentration of, infrastructure, in particular at the cloud level, where we have a combination of the ownership of compute, software, hardware, and data, which is changing, the business model of many companies, not just digital companies, but many companies in every sector. And now with all the investment that's going in artificial intelligence, which basically means, our data finally, which they have been collecting for many years without actually any regulation that has forbidden this continuous amassing knowledge that we constantly produce as citizens in the hands of very few companies. Now this concentration and this vertical integration is becoming so strong that I think we can say there are probably 5 or 6 multinational companies in the world, and only them are able to manage these very, very critical infrastructures of our modern life. So to me, this seems a problem that cannot be left to hackers, to technologists, to NGOs, to activists, but should be at the very core of what our elected politicians are thinking about. I mean, meaning, what do we do in order to redistribute this power to the people? Because again, this power, which is so concentrated, means also they don't pay taxes. We are basically, they're eating our lunch, literally. And you know, and more and more we have we are going to be having a lot of difficulties in accessing essential services, essential, you know, services of society for this very, very reason. So I just want to make the point, and then I end here, that we usually think too much in terms of technical infrastructure. Do you care about privacy? What about the blockchain? What about data? What about here? It's not a technical thing. I think we're talking about a very political issues that is affecting, yeah, every you know, basic aspects of our life.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Francesca, also for like speaking up and like saying out those things like quite in like quite direct manner. I'm so sorry. Okay, now it's working. All right. So one point you were raising was that we need to like raise the awareness of politicians, and this is actually like a thing which I agree about. And you're doing this by consulting the commission from time to time, but also you were doing this in an event you co-organized in September this year in the European Parliament, where you were kind of like trying to get all the parliamentarians together in one room, and you were advocating for what you called Eurostack. And you were basically advocating for like investing and financing public digital infrastructure. So could you probably tell the audience a little bit more, like, what is the Eurostack? What is the vision of it? And why do you think it's relevant?
Yeah, so I think, again, this is probably not the best name, the Eurostack, but what we mean is that what you show in the graph is very worrying for Europe, because I think we have now a dependency of more than 80% at all layers of the technological infrastructures, from the chips to the data centers, to the supercomputing, to the cloud, to the artificial intelligence, the services on top, but also basic, you know, your email system, your identity management, your payment system. I mean, look, our life is basically not in the hands. I mean, so firstly, I just want to say, when we talk about digital sovereignty, because that's what we're denouncing, the lack of digital sovereignty. And of course, digital sovereignty intended not only as technological sovereignty, but as I explained before, as a part of a broader, you know, political sovereignty, economic sovereignty, and also industrial sovereignty. So since all of these technologies and the technology infrastructure that I explained before, as you probably know in this audience, is more and more sophisticated, and at all level of the technology stack, Europe doesn't own anything. So not only there is no democratic accountability and democratic control, but it's also literally in the hands of foreign big corporations. And since we have been spending in the European Union, in the European Parliament, let's say the last 5 years, very much concentrated on regulation. And I know that here, especially in Germany, you're quite fond of regulatory power of the state and kind of proud that we are able to regulate. But I kept saying to the European Commission that regulation is good, is okay, especially some regulation we are proud of, like the GDPR for data protection, the DSA for misinformation, but also, you know, basically, for example, what you be talking about later, like public money, public code, interoperability, open standards, I mean, open source software, all of these things are good and they're part of the regulation. But this is not enough, because what's happening is that Europe has a regulation and is there, facing people like Elon Musk that are saying, well, I don't care about Europe and your regulation. And in case, I will shut down my service in Europe. And we are seeing also there is a lot of confrontation on that level. And I think for a variety of reasons, and also for geopolitical questions and supply chain disruptions and all of the stuff that is happening now, it will be very hard that Europe manages to regulate these tech giants. We will make maybe some progress, maybe in some parts it will be slightly better, but my focus has always been, and it keeps being, especially now in the situation we're in building alternatives. So we don't only have to regulate, but we have to invest in alternative infrastructures. And I think we have to put forward a different model that's not the big tech that we see in the US. So like gigantic corporations like Google, Apple, Amazon, and so on, which are monetizing our data and basically, owning all the stack. And we know basically surveillance capitalism being the main, business model. But we also don't really want the Chinese state model, yes, like very centralized, all the data in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, I think this wouldn't really be compatible with our liberal democracy and our basic social rights. So I think that Europe cannot just be a spectator watching, the future being regulated by these giants and these two models, the big tech and the big state. So I've been advocating for this concept of big democracy. And I said, we need a third way. It's not the big state. It's not the big tech. We need public infrastructure. We need democratic accountability. And we need these infrastructures to be independent. And what I mean by independent is that I think we have really, really a strong need for independent from the big corporations, but also independent from state control or state surveillance, because we have been seeing that, it's also not okay. And I mean, I just ended my term. I was sitting in the executive board of the Italian public TV. And I can tell you that when the government changes, and in Italy, unfortunately, we have a very right-wing government, the first thing they're going to do is controlling public TV. So I know that here in Germany, you think everything is okay because you have actually pretty good system and actually pretty good, and you maybe do in terms of regulation. But if there is a change in government and all of a sudden, and we see a rise of the far right everywhere, not only Europe, globally, I think it's very important that we put the right, public guarantees, safeguards, democratic control, and that there are some independence in the way we run critical infrastructures upon which we depend on. So that was our event in Brussels. So the Eurostack is basically saying, okay, let's get more control here because we are totally dependent from the tech giants. And let's also find a way that we can govern this infrastructure that's more aligned with the type of society we want to live in Europe. Workers' rights, environmental standards, data protection laws. I mean, all these things, let's make sure that we can. So I know that it sounds utopic and you're like, oh my God, what is she talking about? I mean, we live, this is not how we experience it. I understand that. But I think if we don't start building this alternative, if we don't, make it a priority in politics, in the political space, if we don't start allocating investment and resources, this will never happen. And I tell you that when I was younger, because I'm not too young, unfortunately, anymore, actually, the new generation is born in the corporate internet. So for them, actually not even bullshit. They're not born in the internet. They're born in, corporate apps. They're born already in I Google instead of I search. They're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, they do all these things. There's not even the kind of open internet that we used to dream long time ago. And I have to say, my generation was part of a, let's say, transition to the digital world. And we were really, I mean, when I was young, we were running our servers, we were running our emails, we were running our, we believed that there was a possibility to have a really autonomous infrastructure. Of course, this is like not the case today. I mean, let's yes, it is very complicated, it's very complex, but at the same time, we do have the power to allocate, I mean, first of all, to pretend that there are parts of these infrastructures where our data is kept, our digital identity, the payment, the digital euro, the public layer of this infrastructure should be truly public because it has to serve citizens. It doesn't have to serve only corporation. It doesn't have to serve only military uses. It has to serve the citizens. And this is like one thing. And then I think we have enough knowledge, capacity, at least here in Europe, to really galvanize a lot of the tech people, developers, creative people, I mean, people in research centers, universities, and so on, which have a lot of capacity to actually build at least parts of this infrastructure and have a strategy to where we want to get. Because again, this is also a question of security. Supply chains are very complex. The economy, we need to be much more in control. And so that is what the Eurostack is about.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that it's rare that ideas that are that progressive are reaching such a high level in the European Union. So thank you for your
I mean, because nowadays we call, because again, we are going so right-wing that like normal, I have to say that some kind of sensible ideas like, okay, I would like to have, please, my identity and some basic control over the data of the population become like progressive. But honestly, I can tell you, I think it should be like kind of a basic of, what the state is about. Yes, I believe so. I believe so.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I know what you mean.
I don't have to tell you about concerns about right-wing governments in Italy right now, but I mean,
are we streaming this? Yes. So tomorrow
I'm
I
so
won't
sorry.
be able to.
I mean, you talked about that this is kind of a resistance, and the people you were saying that not like the public European internet shouldn't, or the democratic European internet shouldn't come from grassroots organizations and like only tech people, but these are the people that are here right now, and we're I think one of the main goals of the tech community, especially in Germany, has always been to tackle like big tech and corporate power on the one hand. And on the other hand, there is a lot of experience with building alternatives to big tech. But until now, we never managed to like displace it. So there are alternative social media platforms made by like people for like the Fediverse, for example, but also there have been like data platforms from the German government, like Gaia X, for example, and we never managed to displace the big tech. So where do you think we have to tackle this problem? And also, what is the role of civil society and activists? Because all the political change we have seen, the progressive change, has always come also from the grassroots and from movements. So yeah.
Before you're going to answer the question, I just want to invite the audience, because we have a few minutes left to think about questions, and we'll be like open for your questions in a few.
And you can ask them in German as well, and we will translate. Ihr könnt auch auf Deutsch Fragen stellen und wir übersetzen gerne.
You want me to answer first? Okay. Well, no, thanks for the question, because I didn't mean like civil society, grassroots movements, technologists from the grassroots should not participate. I meant that usually it's almost like, oh yeah, let's, it's like kind of a thing left on a side to the activist. And what I wanted to alert is, okay, but what are we facing? I mean, what's the scale of the problem? Because, I as you said, for example, now I'm advising the president, Pedro Sanchez, I'm advising the president of Spain on its artificial intelligence strategy. And actually, we are a good group of people put together by Manuel Castells, an important sociologist, former Minister of Education. And we're giving them a lot of advice, but the situation they're in, for example, is that the CEO of Amazon, just to not to name anyone, will meet maybe the prime minister and say, okay, here is on the table an investment of 15 billion euros to build that data center. You know, the data center, because we need to build much more data centers to power AI. And these data centers, of course, is creating, you know, massive problems with energy use, with water, with a lot of, with like a lot of extraction. And of course, we will use it mainly to power our cloud system in the US. And so basically, very little will stay actually in Spain. But basically, the government are literally bribed by all this money in a moment of economic crisis, and they kind of can't resist, and they're like, yeah, okay, let's go ahead. Even if they are progressive politicians, for example, like the Spanish government, which is really progressive on a lot of issues, but they're just, you know, very hard to basically resist this. And the scale of the problem is that billions of investment. I mean, if you see how much China, the US are investing in artificial intelligence today, I mean, here we are talking hundreds of billions of investments, even trillions. Yes. So to say that a bunch of independent open source technologies and activists will actually build alternative to this, to me, it's delusional. Like, let's stop this. I mean, I mean, of course, we will need to come together. And of course, I mean, when I was in Barcelona, I was the CTO. We were running it from a city, like a public administration. We did a lot of alternatives. Like I put clauses in public procurement contracts, mandating open source, mandating data sovereignty. Like we actually did big changes. We built Decidim platform, which is an open source participatory platform that many people use. But I mean, this is like a very small part of what we should do as Europe if we want to say we're building a distinct model because we actually want to be sovereign to decide the direction of our future. Make it, you know, respecting of human rights, respecting of the environment, worker rights, data protection, and so on. So what I'm saying here is that we all are going to have a role, but I think we have to elevate the problem and say, and this is not going to be only a government, because I think the European industry will have to do their part, of course, but maybe with some principles, like maybe we want to make sure that, you know, there is environmental compatibility, because if we have the Green Deal and then we build this kind of data centers, then we have to go to nuclear reactors. Yes, this is what's happening. And then we're going to get BlackRock to run these data centers. I mean, honestly, is this what we want to see in Europe? Is this the plan? That's what I'm asking. What's the plan? Where are we going? And I mean, I don't think we can just ask to the citizens to solve it.
Thank you, Francesca. So we do have only a few minutes left for questions, so I kindly ask you to be brief. And we can pick up probably this question in the or comments as well. Last row, and then I saw the hand in the first row, and then we'll have the lady in blue. Okay. Yeah. What do you think would be the role of communication of people working with community?
Yeah. Should I get more questions, or
are you okay? Are you okay to get some more questions? Okay, so first.
No. Sometimes I need to learn that technique. Assuming there are people in the room who can spend a little bit of corporate influence, not much, but a little bit. Is there something you would tell them how to spend that influence?
I don't know if I really understand this question. Corporate influence.
So if someone here would be someone who would speak to people in the corporate sector and has some influence, but only a little bit, what would you suggest she or he would do to improve what you want to be improved?
Okay, and then there's the lady in the with the blue shirt. And then I think we stop for that for now because the what's
Ach, ich mache es auch auf Deutsch. Meine Frage ist, ob Ihre Forderungen vorsehen, ein Recht auf analoges Leben, ein individuelles Recht auf analoges Leben und inwieweit Sie die Elektrosensibilität von Personen berücksichtigen. Ich leide mutmaßlich total unter dieser Digitalisierung. Starke gesundheitliche Einwirkungen.
okay. I just try to translate that question. So first was whether you're considering a right to live in the analog space or without digitalization in general. And the second one was whether, I'm not so sure how to translate that, I need to admit, but whether like the electronic, how can I translate that? Like, help me out.
I think okay, I think focusing on the analog life is like being outside the digital space should be a part of
A right as well. And also about health issues, which are probably linked to that.
Okay, so the first one and the second one, somehow I find them connected, because I think what I'm saying is that, and you also ask the role of civil society and independent technologists, and then you ask the role of public administration, and you ask the corporate kind of role. And I think what I really think is that it should be mixed. Yes, the effort, it should come from all these different places, because I think, for example, in public administration, of course, a lot can be done. I think more than what we think, because somehow we have shrank our imagination and we think, the government is so inefficient and so ineffective and so bureaucratic, which of course it has some part of truth. But at the same time, so much can be done to improve the processes, to work together inside the administration, to work on this kind of more, public digital infrastructure. As I said, in Barcelona, I mean, I focus a lot on capacity building, on building knowledge, on getting, the employees to really participate, to understand, for example, the value of data, to understand the value of open source, to try and share this data where they were working and try to create new skills and so on. But also, I think, to really kind of put it up in the policy agenda. When I remember, I mean, not only, I make the Barcelona example because I worked there for the entire mandate and I did a lot of things. But anyways, I also worked for government, for the national governments and the European Commission. And many times, especially in national governments or in local governments, I think the technology parts is seen like, oh, the people that fix the computers, it's like, the kind of technical departments, And so, for example, one like part of my work has been to totally create a a department for data that was responding directly to the mayor, because I said data is not about, you know, the technology, is about strategic decision making, is about scaling of processes. It's really important to control the data, but it's about, you know, being able to do your policies and then to show that you're doing your policy. So I think it's also about, yeah, explaining what is the role of digitization inside the bigger government, which I think is missing. And then for the corporate, I think what I would say is really invest in digital sovereignty, but for real. Because I think the frustration here in Europe is that now we all talk about digital sovereignty, technological sovereignty, and so on. But then if you go to see where the investment is going, both private R&D, which is actually much lower than in the States and in other places, and also the public money that the European Commission or even governments are investing, it's going to again reinforce the dominance of the hyperscalers, which are not European. So my point is, okay, let's join up forces with a strategic view of exactly building this Euro stack. And let's see what Europe has and what is building at different layers. And let's just build, so let's build a success technology product here in Europe. Because I think if now I ask you, what is a success story, you will find it very hard to reply. Then to the disconnection, I don't know if you mean, I think the right to disconnect should be a right. And it is now, you know, a lot of unions and there are regulations like in France and other countries that make this very clear. But if you ask me, like, can we actually live analog? I think this is going to be a privilege for the billionaires. This is not going to be, you know, so what I'm saying is let's don't make the mistake of thinking that, oh, we can just, you know, we can just live without, because if you can do it, you're going to have a privilege because they're digitizing everything. And basically my approach is we constructed and we are part of the process to shape it in a way that we maintain the civil rights, we maintain the collective rights, and not like we just, you know, gonna think that we are gonna live in the countryside without the internet. It's going to be a privilege for the super rich, which in fact they already do, like the, you know, the kids of the Silicon Valley CEOs, which they don't have to spend much time on the internet.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Francesca. Big applause. Thank you for coming and making time. And we'll hand over to Anja, I guess.
Thank you very much. Also from my side, I'm already in, but you got me with everything you said. Yes, and now we talked a lot about the European perspective, but as a critical civil society, however, it is also very important for us to make underrepresented voices heard. That is why we are now looking forward to a completely different perspective and the talk by Esther on colonial imaginations and big tech ownership of African internet infrastructure. Before we get started, we can say maybe hello to Esther if this works already. Yeah, hi Esther, welcome. I will give a short introduction on your person and then I give you the word. Esther is an artist and digital inequalities practitioner with expertise in internet governance, tech innovation, and digital rights from Zambia. Her practice intersects art and technology, interrogating hidden systems of power and technology, such as fiber optic cables, and digital colonialism. She has over 10 years commitment to social impact at the grassroots via her non-profits and has done extensive work within the UN system. Esther is an open internet for democracy leader who centers African feminist and decolonial methodologies in practice. Esther, I'm very happy to have you here online today, and I hope that everything with the technique works well.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be speaking to the chairs in front of me. So thank you for having me. Can I go ahead? Perfect. So hi everyone, I'm Esther and I am an artist and also a digital inequalities practitioner. So in my work, I mainly use storytelling as a methodology to understand invisibility of power structures. So I've been really fascinated by things like internet infrastructure and digital colonialism, because these are concepts that are a bit huge to grasp. So I try to simplify it and make that more accessible to grassroots communities. I do this through my artist work, and I also do it as founder of Digital Grassroots and also through the different fellowships that I have been part of. So I'm excited to come just after the amazing interview that you had with Francesca Bria. And I think that it marries. There are a lot of ideas that resonate with what I'm about to talk about colonial imaginations and big tech ownership of internet infrastructure. I will be sharing some slides. So I want us to have a visual experience to see, when did this imagination start? What do we mean by digital colonialism? Some people have argued that it's too theoretical, or we're trying to bring up things from the past that have no impact today. But in my presentation, I want to hone in the point that the colonial and capitalist ideology that made slavery possible is still happening today, but in a whole different way, through infrastructure. Allow me to share my screen so that we can go through that. Thank you. So here we're seeing an artwork that I drew of the African continent. And around it, what we're seeing is undersea cables. So many of us may already know that over 95% of our internet comes through undersea cables. And increasingly along the years, we've seen ownership changing to be more privatized. And through my work on understanding this, I looked about where did this start from. And I think this image is a very good representation from the year 1866. So in the 1800s, in the mid-1800s, this image was what was published in the paper to show the first telegraphic cable. This is the ancestor or predecessor of the undersea cables that bring our internet today. And what we see in the messaging here is that these undersea cables showed a relationship already between the United States and the United Kingdom on using infrastructure to diffuse religion, civilization in quotations, liberty in quotations, and law throughout the world. So we already are starting to see an imagination that infrastructure is going to change how we view the world. Whose imagination was not included in this story is a question we can ask ourselves. And so to explain what colonialism is, I took this quote from Evaristo Benier's book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Africa. And what he says is that the Fourth Industrial Revolution renders Africa terra nullius, terra inhabitilis, and tabula rasa. So what that means is Africa is seen as an empty slate. So we're hearing a lot of rhetoric about the digital divide and how we have to bring more people online, with Africa being the continent that is the most disconnected, or with the least connectivity to the internet in the whole world. So Evaristo Beniera argues that with the product of colonialism and decolonization, the Fourth Industrial Revolution organizes another scramble for Africa, and this time it's a scramble for its data. And we'll see how this is happening. So before we see how that is happening, we also see another imagination, another imagery, and this is Cecil Rhodes, who became the first, he was a prime minister. I don't know if that's the right word. He was a British businessman who took over the Cape Colony. And this image shows his vision to bridge from Cape to Cairo, to bridge South Africa to Egypt. And this imagination continues. So the dream was to build telegraph lines in Africa and also around Africa. And this is where we see that there was actually the use of slave labor in the process of building these telegraphic wires, which is the same route that was used during the slave trade and is also the same route that is being used today to build the undersea cables. And we go back to another imagination from Nikola Tesla, and many people do not necessarily know this, but one thing that Nikola Tesla said a few years before he died was that wireless would be very efficient in enlightening the masses, particularly in still uncivilized, quote, countries and less accessible regions, and that it will add materially to general safety, comfort, and convenience, and maintenance of peaceful relations. And what we're seeing here is also a rhetoric that we keep hearing with the digital divide. The digital divide will connect more people. It will ensure people are more safe with surveillance, and it will be more convenient. And with us, with COVID-19 and more people getting online, we're seeing that it's almost impossible to access healthcare or education without having access to the internet. So we see that it has already changed a lot of how we live our lives. And so what we see, I love that Francesca Bria already talked about this, is that the stack, that the TCP IP, it's now being overtaken by big tech corporations. So we had Google and Meta just being at the top level, the application layer of the internet, but now we're seeing them going into all the layers of the internet. And that makes it goes against the principles of an open internet and ultimately makes them more or less permanent favorites, which is also leading to a discussion towards the fragmentation of the internet. So if we look at, if the reality of a Eurostack happens and China has its own internet, so we'll see a lot of fragmentation happening, and there will not be a lot of openness and innovation that is really necessary for a free, open, fair, and democratic society. And this is where I really want to hone in on the conversation. What we're looking at is Meta's 4,500 kilometer undersea cable. Meta, in a consortium, has built these undersea cables literally around the African continent. And when we think about the scope of this project, it's almost difficult to fathom. To Africa is seen as a gift, also quotes to Africa. And it was formerly known as Simba, but they renamed that. And this undersea cable will have 45 landing points. Of course, we know with slavery, there were landing ports, but this is a whole different ballgame. But the most interesting thing about these undersea cables is that they're just outside the country jurisdiction. So even with Meta having these undersea cables, local companies would have to connect to them, and those local companies will be the ones that will be paying the tax, or who will be, so Facebook or Meta will not have any legal jurisdiction. How is this possible? How did this come to be in 2024 that Meta has such a stronghold of the continent, for lack of better words? But Meta is not the only one. I also looked into Google's Equiano, other quotes, So Google named their undersea cable after the monumental slave trade abolitionist Olajuwon Equiano. Olajuwon Equiano was forcibly taken as a slave, and the path that Olajuwon Equiano traveled is the same path that Google's undersea cables is traveling. So it's really a question of what is this imagination trying to tell us, and how is it okay for Google, a private company aiming to make profit, to use the name of an abolitionist in their undersea cable that is literally slicing across half of the African continent. But that is not all. There are a lot of images, so bear with me. I think with colonial imagination, I want to show that it's not just theoretical, it is practical and we can see it. And that's why I'm showing all these images, even though my face is very small in the background. So Google did not stop with their Equiano undersea cable, but they're also aiming to build another fiber optic cables that are cutting through Eastern and Southern Africa, going all the way to Australia for some reason. And they call this umoya, which means in Swahili, means togetherness. So with Google, they're trying to seem to contextualize or localize the name of their undersea cables so that it seems more friendly and also more approachable. But there is more to the story. And this is something I also want to share. What is the biggest story? The biggest story is where Google's Umoya is planning to pass through. I don't know if they've already passed through. It's something I just found out this year, because most of their developments are always done in secrecy until it's no longer a secret, is that Google's Umoya's fiber optic cable passes in the same countries and in the same line as the rare earth minerals. So these rare critical earth minerals are very important for the development of green technology, and they're also invaluable for the development of the tech we use. So all the countries that are passing, that Google's fiber optic cable is passing through, have got critical rare earth minerals, from Kenya to Uganda to the Democratic Republic of Congo, to the Republic of Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa. So we see that there is something going on here beyond just technology, because we know there's a race towards these rare earth minerals. And according to studies, at least 25 trillion will be needed of rare earth minerals to build the green technology that we're all vying for. And this is going to pass through indigenous lands, it's going to pass through areas where animals live, areas of our planet that are really relevant to ensure the climate crisis does not escalate. So it's really a question of what is happening here. And ultimately, clean energy technologies have a cost, and the digital divide also has a cost. But the question is, who is going to pay it, and when are we going to pay it? And of course, we have Starlink, and we won't go deep into that, and also into space debris or satellite waste or tech waste. But I just want to show that they are also vying to go into the Africa internet infrastructure space. I remember one time when I went on a hike and it was just beautiful and green. And when I looked up in the sky, I saw the constellations of Starlink circling above us. So it's really interesting to see that private organizations are owning 99% of cables and only about 1% of submarine cables are owned or partly owned by a government entity. And this brings us to the question, is the internet a public good? Can big tech ethically solve the digital divide? And at what cost is the digital evolution? So I will share some of the imaginations that we have collected from different stakeholder groups. And this is my project called AfroGrids. And we were looking at, is it possible to have both localized and universal infrastructure? Is it possible that tech co-ops can invest and own our own internet infrastructure? And also it was looking at mesh networks or some solutions, or generally feeling sad about the state of the world. So this was a project that I did, but ultimately we asked the question, do we want Google here? And so here are some reading recommendations. I'll leave that up for a little bit before I close the presentation and just share more of my perspectives on this. But these slides are available for anyone who wants them. So recommendations, the paper that I wrote with Dr. Abeba Birhan looks at this in good detail. And I think there's the Nation's article that came out this month on copper colonialism and how it's wrecking Zambia's farmlands and waterways. There's also Eaten by the Internet with a lot of amazing authors, and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Recolonization of Africa by Evaristo Benyera as well. So this is basically a lot of information, but what I wanted to share was that we're living in a time where the imagination of Silicon Valley, the imagination of the patriarchy, and the imagination of white saviorism has taken a hold of our societies and how we function. And more, we find ourselves addicted to what they are offering. And not only addicted, but also we find that we cannot separate ourselves. Like, it took me a long time to try not to get on Google Drive, but ultimately I am using Google Drive. And we see that they are just using the resources that are made from data to build more, to sell us more dreams through AI, and to call that we should bridge the digital divide because we are helping people. This is how the world evolves. But this ethos of move fast and break things is really dangerous because it doesn't take into consideration the humanity and the planet and the costs that it has when we want to do more and want to live our lives online. So with the African continent, it's quite challenging because we see that it's not the same as the EU, because in Africa we have got 54 countries and each of them have their own policies, each of them have got their own issues to deal with. But what we see is that big tech is taking advantage of that because they're able to build without consent. They're able to build under secrecy, and there's no strong body to oppose them or to call into question how this is possible. And this will have implications for our democracy on the continent. It will have implications for our own imagination and what is possible for us. It will also have implications on business and innovation of the local market, because with the undersea cables by Google and Meta, they have disrupted the market. So it will be very difficult for alternatives to grow outside of these big tech companies. So as an artist, the work that I do is making sure that a lot of what is happening is publicized. So I use storytelling. So AfroGrids was a storytelling project that took my understanding of these issues and put them in a way that everyone can understand. and also writing it in an academic way because people do not believe the evidence unless you have a peer-reviewed paper. So working on those both ends is one step, making sure people know, and connecting it to our historical colonialism and seeing how it's bringing new digital colonialism is a way of also saying that we are just moving into new methods of oppression, and it is now that we have to act. And how can we act when this is a very broad problem? That's the question I asked myself, but through asking for transparency and making it known that there's a connection between bridging the digital divide and extraction of minerals and possessing of indigenous lands and also the climate crisis, it shows that it's all interconnected and it might be more sinister than we think it is. So thank you so much for listening to me, and I am happy to take questions and share the slides and share my stories as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther, for your very important insights and information, and also, yeah, unfortunately, really shocking information. Yeah, we have now some minutes for questions from the audience. Because Esther is not here with us, I would like you to come here to speak in the microphone if you have questions, or Rike can also maybe get a bit towards you. Are there any questions? Ihr dürft auch gern wieder auf Deutsch fragen und wir übersetzen. Okay, fang noch mal an, Rike.
Okay. I will start. Maybe you can see me. Hi. It's so nice to not see you in person, but at least bigger than on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I wanted to ask, I mean, this is obviously these problems are huge and it's hard to tackle them, but I would like to know how we can, as like German, European civil society, express solidarity or maybe work towards breaking this corporate power on the African continent in some way. So maybe you have some insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the solidarity. And I would also like to point out, I am sharing the perspective of the African continent because that is an area that I want to spotlight, but I also want to say that a lot of this is also happening in Latin America as well, because a lot of the critical minerals are in our regions, and that's where extraction has been happening. I would also like to point out that the EU's leading on data protection has influenced a lot of the African continent's leading on that. So that is a good thing, because once you're able to sort of regulate or whatever penalties you put on big tech, sort of takes away from their energy or power to do more harm on our continent. So I think the solidarity is really also thinking about what alternatives exist and also co-creating imaginations outside of what is here. Because what I see a lot in a lot of spaces and with a lot of events is that we sort of adopt the imagination of big tech and just say, let's put a woman's face on it, let's make it more communal, but it's really the same thing. And I'll challenge that we have to be more radical in our response and also think about making it possible to, with the right to disconnect, as Francesca Bria shared, making it possible to live life even without the internet, so that there is the option and choice. Yes, that's a very long answer.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? So I have one more for you, Esther, and maybe this is also then the last one because yeah, we have some further program afterwards. I was wondering which forms of resistance exist in Africa against projects like To Africa?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think that there is a lot of forms of resistance about the platforms themselves, like Meta using people from the African continent to peer review their data. I think I used the wrong word, or yeah, to evaluate what data is harmful or not. There is a lot of resistance in terms of it being patriarchal or what is doing to democracy on the continent. But a lot of these projects have had invisibility behind them. So this invisibility, I'll give an example, is I started working on my paper on internet infrastructure in 2022, and it was published this year. And just the amount of digging that had to be done to see what is happening takes a long time. So there's not a lot of transparency, and a lot of these are hidden behind proprietary rights. So we're not seeing direct resistance. And another aspect of it is that with it being a regional thing, the local context can be able to resist it, and there have been talks in civil society, but there isn't like cross-regional solidarity on these infrastructures specifically. And that makes it really difficult to navigate. And that also allows big tech sort of to bully their way into our ecosystem by saying, well, if you don't accept it, we'll just circumvent your country and go to the next country. And it's almost for politicians, it's very tempting because they want to seem progressive. But of course, there's not a lot of awareness about the harms that this will have in the years to come. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Esther. I would like to then thank you again for your time and sharing with us your perspectives and informations. Yeah, goodbye from Frankfurt, from the digital in the digital space. Have a nice evening, and I hope to see you again.
Thank you. I was in Frankfurt a few years ago, and it's beautiful. So good to join digitally. Take care. Bye.
Good enough? Oder? Ja? Okay. Das war jetzt viel Input. Jetzt würde ich noch mal die 3 Workshop-Gebenden herbitten nach vorne, dass ihr kurz in 2 bis 3 Sätzen euren Workshop vorstellt und noch mal sagt, wo ihr seid. Und im Anschluss, ich habe keine Uhr um, im Anschluss machen wir eine Pause, in der ihr was essen könnt, euch ein Getränk an der Bar holen könnt, und um 19:50 Uhr geht es dann in den Workshop-Räumen los.